In ancient Rome, before any major battle, soldiers watched chickens eat. If the birds pecked eagerly at their grain, the omens were good. If they refused to eat, commanders sometimes called off entire campaigns. An animal too small to fight, too common to worship, was trusted to decide the fate of legions. That should tell you everything about a creature that didn't just feed civilizations, it guided them. Chicken became the most eaten meat on the planet. It shaped religious ritual, fueled scientific breakthroughs, built the fast food industry, and exposed the fragility of a food system that now depends on a single genetically narrow bird. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The very traits that made chicken the perfect animal for mass production are the same traits pushing it toward a biological dead end. This is the story of chicken. It starts in the jungles of Southeast Asia, and it ends with a question the entire meat industry is still afraid to answer. Think about the animals humans first relied on for survival. Cattle plow fields and provide milk. Sheep provide wool and hide. Pigs convert scraps into meat efficiently. Chickens do something different. They lay eggs almost every single day. They take up almost no space, and they can be raised by a single family with nothing more than kitchen waste. So why did it take so long for chicken to become the dominant meat on Earth? The answer starts far more recently than most people assume, around 3,500 years ago, in the rice fields of what is now central Thailand. The ancestor of every chicken alive today is the red jungle fowl, Gallus gallus. It's a shy, fast bird that spends most of its life foraging on the forest floor and roosting in trees at night. For decades, scientists assumed chickens had been domesticated up to 10,000 years ago, somewhere across China, Southeast Asia, or India. A major archaeological reevaluation published in 2022 overturned that timeline completely, dating the earliest confirmed domestic chicken remains to between 1650 and 1250 BCE at a site called Ban Non Wat in central Thailand. One species, one region, one starting point, thousands of years later than the old story claimed, for a bird that would eventually spread to every continent on Earth. Here's what makes chicken domestication unusual compared to cattle or pigs. Farmers didn't domesticate the chicken primarily for meat. Early evidence suggests the bird was first kept for cockfighting and ritual, not dinner. Picture a village in early agricultural Southeast Asia. Rice paddies have just begun to reshape the landscape. Grain surpluses attract wild jungle fowl looking for an easy meal. Farmers notice the birds lingering near their fields and begin feeding them deliberately. But it's the roosters that capture their attention first, not for their meat, but for their aggression. Cockfighting appears in the archaeological and cultural record remarkably early, and for a long time, meat and eggs were almost a byproduct of a bird kept for spectacle and status. That single detail changes how we should read the entire history of chicken. It didn't rise because humans were hungry. It rose because humans were curious, competitive, and slow to realize what they were sitting on. From Southeast Asia, chickens moved along trade and migration routes into India, then westward into Persia and the Mediterranean. And in Egypt, something happened that would matter far more than religion or sport. The Egyptians cracked one of the oldest technical problems in animal husbandry. How do you hatch eggs at scale without a hen? By around 300 BCE, Egyptian chicken keepers had developed large mud brick incubators capable of hatching thousands of eggs at once, using carefully controlled fires and airflow instead of a bird sitting on a nest. Imagine walking into one of these structures, rows of shelves stacked with eggs, attendants monitoring heat day and night for 3 straight weeks, no thermometers, no electricity, just centuries of accumulated instinct passed down as trade secrets. Egyptian incubator masters guarded their techniques so closely that the methods were treated as a hereditary craft, passed from father to son. That single invention, artificial incubation without a hen, is arguably the first moment chicken production stopped being purely a farmyard activity and started becoming an industry. While Egypt solved incubation, Rome solved something else entirely: appetite. The Romans didn't just eat chicken, they systematized it. Roman agricultural writers such as Columella left detailed instructions on breeding, feeding, and fattening hens for the table, treating poultry keeping as a serious branch of estate management rather than a rural afterthought. Picture a Roman estate manager reviewing his poultry yard. Hens are separated by breed and purpose. Some kept purely for eggs, others fattened specifically for banquets. The Romans even pioneered force-feeding techniques using softened bread and milk to fatten birds quickly, a precursor to practices still debated in poultry farming today. And it wasn't only about food. Chicken bones have been found deep in the Roman military and trade network, spreading with the legions into Britain, Gaul, and the Rhine frontier. Wherever Rome went, chicken went with it. That flexibility, sacred, competitive, culinary, all wrapped into one small bird, is exactly what let chicken survive the collapse of the empire that had industrialized it. Chicken also drew religious and symbolic lines that still shape belief systems today, though far less rigidly than the pork prohibitions of Judaism and Islam. In several West African and Afro-Caribbean spiritual traditions, chickens play a central role in ritual sacrifice and divination, a practice with roots stretching back centuries and still observed today in traditions like Santeria and Vodou. In parts of Southeast Asia, chicken feet and organs are read by diviners the same way Roman priests once read the behavior of sacred hens before battle. The what varies wildly by culture, the why is remarkably consistent. Chickens were cheap enough to sacrifice without financial ruin, and common enough that nearly every household had one on hand. Unlike cattle, you didn't need wealth to make an offering. That accessibility is precisely what embedded chicken into ritual life across dozens of unrelated cultures that never had contact with each other. For most of human history, chicken remained a small-scale, almost incidental food, valuable, but never abundant. That changed with a slogan that reshaped an entire nation's diet. During the difficult years of the Great Depression and the Second World War, red meat in the United States was expensive and at times rationed. Herbert Hoover's 1928 campaign is often remembered for promising a chicken in every pot, a phrase that captured something real. Chicken was still considered a luxury, a Sunday dinner, not a Tuesday staple. Picture an American household in the 1930s. Beef is rationed, pork is scarce, but a backyard flock of hens can still produce eggs daily and occasionally a bird for the table. That scarcity is what quietly primed post-war America to embrace chicken the moment industrial production made it cheap. The country wasn't just hungry for protein. It was primed to fall in love with a bird it had once considered special. And then, in 1948, an experiment changed chicken forever. Two things would happen in the post-war United States that transformed a farmyard bird into the most efficient meat-producing animal on the planet. One reshaped genetics, the other reshaped fast food, and both started with a contest sponsored by a supermarket chain. In 1948, the A&P grocery chain launched the Chicken of Tomorrow contest, offering prize money to breeders who could produce a chicken with more breast meat, faster growth, and lower feed costs. Thousands of breeders across the country entered. The winning lines, crosses between Cornish and White Plymouth Rock birds, became the genetic foundation for nearly every broiler chicken raised commercially today. Imagine a breeding facility in the late 1940s, rows of cages, technicians tracking growth rates down to the ounce, competing not for taste or hardiness, but for a single metric: how fast can this bird turn feed into meat? That contest is why a modern broiler reaches market weight in roughly 6 weeks, compared to 3 or 4 months just decades earlier. The chicken hadn't just been farmed anymore, it had been engineered. That engineered bird arrived at exactly the moment America was building highways, suburbs, and a culture built around speed. Fast food didn't invent the demand for chicken, it exploited a supply chain that had just become cheap enough to scale. Colonel Harlan Sanders had been perfecting a pressure-fried chicken recipe at his roadside restaurant in Kentucky since the 1930s, but it was the franchise boom of the 1950s and 1960s that turned Kentucky Fried Chicken into a national, then global phenomenon. Why did fried chicken, of all foods, become the vehicle for America's fast food expansion overseas? Because it traveled well. Unlike a hamburger, fried chicken didn't require refrigerated beef supply chains or cultural familiarity with ground meat. It could be adapted to local spices, local birds, local tastes, while keeping the same basic format. By the late 20th century, fried and grilled chicken chains had planted flags on every inhabited continent, often outpacing beef-based competitors in markets where cattle farming was limited or culturally restricted. By the 2020s, chicken had become the most consumed meat on Earth, overtaking pork for the first time in modern history. Global production exceeded 100 million metric tons annually, and one country's transformation captured the scale of that shift better than any other. Remember that chicken of tomorrow contest and the genetic lines it produced? By the 2020s, a small handful of breeding companies controlled the genetics behind nearly every broiler chicken raised commercially worldwide. 2 or 3 companies, breeding lines used across dozens of countries, one system. Could something go wrong? The question answers itself, because the same traits that made this system so efficient, rapid growth, genetic uniformity, dense confinement, are exactly the traits that make it dangerously fragile. Highly pathogenic avian influenza has repeatedly torn through commercial flocks over the past 2 decades, and when it hits a facility housing tens of thousands of genetically near-identical birds, the disease doesn't spread, it detonates. In outbreak years across North America, Europe, and Asia, tens of millions of birds have been culled within months to prevent wider spread, sending egg and poultry prices soaring and exposing just how little genetic diversity remains in the global flock. Picture a farmer in the American Midwest who has built a barn housing 50,000 broilers, his entire operation timed around 6-week growth cycles. One morning, test results come back positive. Within days, the entire flock is gone. The barn that housed tens of thousands sits empty, disinfected, waiting to start again from birds with the exact same genetics that failed before. Today, the same animal exists in radically different worlds. In rural Southeast Asia, backyard flocks still forage freely, much as their jungle fowl ancestors did, providing eggs and the occasional meal exactly as they have for thousands of years. In an industrial processing plant in Arkansas or Brazil, a chicken can go from hatchling to packaged cuts in under 7 weeks. A scale of speed 19th century farmers could never have imagined. In France, poulet de Bresse carries legal protection and centuries of tradition, birds raised on open pasture and finished on milk, sold for prices that dwarf a supermarket broiler. In Nigeria and across much of West Africa, chicken remains woven into ceremony and celebration, reserved for weddings, festivals, and moments that matter. Chicken isn't just a commodity anymore. It's tradition, spectacle, ritual, and industrial efficiency, all wearing the same feathers. But the industry now faces pressures that speed alone can't solve. Animal welfare campaigns reshaping consumer expectations across Europe, environmental concerns over feed and water use, and a genetic bottleneck that leaves the global supply exposed to any disease capable of exploiting it. Some producers are already turning to heritage breeds and slower growth rates to rebuild resilience. Others are betting entirely on lab-grown and cultivated chicken to sidestep the vulnerability altogether. But wherever humans built permanent settlements, wherever they needed a source of protein small enough for a single family to manage, the chicken revealed exactly what those societies were willing to trade for: convenience, speed or resilience, uniformity or diversity, abundance or fragility. 3,500 years ago, a farmer in a Southeast Asian rice field looked at a shy forest bird and made a choice. That choice echoes in every bucket of fried chicken, every backyard coop, every sacred ritual, every assembly line hatchery, and every barn emptied overnight by an outbreak no one saw coming. The chicken is still in the yard. It's just that the yard keeps getting bigger. If you found this story surprising, watch our video on the history of the egg, the food that chicken made possible and that changed how humans define breakfast itself. The link is right here. And if you want more stories like this every week about the ordinary things that quietly built the world, subscribe. See you in the next one.